When I was in film school, I came across a book that would be a real game changer for me, and that's what you see here. The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler, Mythic Structure for Writers. So what is this exactly? Well, essentially it's an alternate way of looking at storytelling in movies as opposed to the traditional 3-act structure. This book is based on the teachings of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was born in the early 1900s and was an American professor of literature. And he spent a lot of his life studying religion and myth. And he found some striking similarities in the way people tell stories all across the world. And in many of these stories, he found some common beats or common stages, you might say, creating a sort of structure that's known as the monomyth, or the hero's journey. And this resulted in his most famous book, probably, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. I would say Campbell's most famous connection to pop culture is probably that his works and his teachings was a big inspiration for George Lucas as the original Star Wars was created. So what Christopher Vogler did was that he essentially took the teachings of Joseph Campbell and sort of streamlined them and made them more contemporary. Vogler identified 8 archetypes and 12 stages of the journey a character undertakes. So in this video we will look at the archetypes, and in the later video the journey itself. So you might ask, what is the difference between a stereotype and an archetype? It sort of sounds about the same. If you imagine, a stereotype is essentially something quite specific and overused. If you ever watch a movie and you feel like, hey, I've seen this character 1,000 times before, like a blonde who makes really stupid decisions in a horror movie. While an archetype is sort of a broader term and that carries a bit more depth to them. You can think of it sort of like a mask that a character wears during the story. And that's sort of like what archetypes are, is the roles that character play in a story, be it like a book or a video game or a movie. And I think what's so interesting about working with archetypes is the idea is that they sort of represent different parts of our personality. For me, it just makes things a bit more interesting and I guess more colorful than the traditional way of looking at characters. So what we have is 8 archetypes, and these are the ones that Christopher Vogler distilled it all down to. If you look at Campbell's teachings, there are other archetypes, or maybe the same archetype but with slightly different names. But for simplicity's sake, we will look at what Christopher Vogler writes in A Writer's Journey. So I guess we start off with the hero and essentially the main character of your story. The hero has something he or she wants to achieve and takes action to make sure that that happens. And that can be 1,000 different things, like solving a murder mystery, or finding true love, or going on a quest to find a religious artifact. The hero is actually, for the most part, pretty reluctant to take action, but eventually does. Preferably this hero character is someone we like, or we grow to like as the story progresses. You can also have multiple heroes, for example, like the Magnificent Seven or the Avengers. So there are many types of heroes. You have, for example, a tragic hero, usually someone who doesn't learn from their mistakes as the story goes along, and is sort of up to the audience to learn the lesson of the hero's mistakes. You also have the anti-hero, which is sort of related, I guess, to the tragic hero. It may not be someone we necessarily identify with, but it should be someone that we are at least fascinated by, and on some level we can understand their actions. If you look at Tony Montana in Scarface, I think few of us feel the urge to run a drug empire. At least I hope so. But I think we all love like an underdog story, right? Someone who comes from nothing and gains everything. So what does the hero archetype represent inside ourselves? Basically all your finest virtues, the kindness in your heart, your compassion, willingness to help others. But there's also a risk that all these fine traits might get your head up in the clouds. A hero is sometimes referred to as the higher self or the ego. You know, the little part of us that maybe sometimes feel a bit above everyone else, or maybe feel misunderstood or maybe even outcast. So a hero's internal struggle is essentially to heal. As an example, we can look at Die Hard. John McClane has an ego, meaning he's very stubborn and he hates to lose. And those traits help him when the terrorists take over Nakatomi Plaza. But those same traits also prevents him from having a happy marriage with his wife. It's when he's at his lowest point that he finally apologizes to his wife through a CB radio, even though he knows that she can't listen in. When he survives the whole ordeal, he sort of comes out of the building as more of a complete person, I guess you could say. So next up we have the mentor. Campbell referred to this archetype as the wise old woman or the wise old man. In many stories this is a pretty accurate description. I mean, the mentor is usually like a wise old character of some sort, but it doesn't have to be that way. This character or this archetype provides guidance and wisdom and maybe teaches the hero a new skill of some kind, and also might provide a physical gift of some kind, like a lightsaber. A mentor can also provide a specific piece of information. Some classic mentors would be like Gandalf or Obi-Wan or Mr. Miyagi. We can also have a dark mentor like the Emperor in Star Wars. A mentor doesn't have to be a physical person or creature. Sometimes a character will have sort of the wisdom inside themselves. If we look at Ellen Ripley, one of the classic characters in cinema, she doesn't really have a mentor. She sort of already have, when we meet her, sort of an inner wisdom and a code. Had the crew of the Nostromo just listened to her and followed quarantine protocols, the alien most likely would have been contained right from the start. And a mentor could be an object of some kind. I mean, a map technically is a mentor. It's important to realize that these archetypes usually intertwine, so sometimes you will have a hero who is also a mentor. If we look at Marty McFly in Back to the Future, I mean, the characters around him evolve, and the world around him evolve, but his actually sort of stays the same, acting as a mentor to the characters around him. And it was only in the second and third film where the writers sort of had to invent a weakness for him, so he had something to overcome.
What's wrong, McFly? Chicken?
So what does the mentor archetype represent inside ourselves? Well, I think it sort of represents our inner wisdom, our sixth sense, if you will. Your gut feeling. You know, that little voice in your head that tells you that something might not be a good idea or a really great idea. Next up we have the archetype Herald, something that tells the hero, oh, it might be time to act. So this can be a character or an event or a happening of some kind, like a tremor in an earthquake movie, for example, or the shark attacks in Jaws. In a romantic comedy, it could be the main character being asked out on a date or meeting the person of their dreams. So within us, this sort of represents the urge for change or the motivation we feel to change up our lives somehow. So next up, we have the Threshold Guardian. And this is essentially the obstacles that the hero faces on his quest or his journey.
None shall pass.
This could be people, monsters, inner demons, or maybe traps. So what does a treasure guardian represent inside ourselves? Is essentially like phobias or neurosis or like the feeling of not being good enough. Essentially the obstacles we place upon ourselves, like being afraid of cramped spaces or open spaces, or a fear of spiders or heights. Shadow. All the bad things you can think of. Well, in its most simple terms, this is the bad guy of your story. Sometimes it can be a fallen hero or a reflection of a hero in one way or another. A shadow doesn't have to be all bad. It's actually way more interesting if the shadow has some good in him or her. The hero's opponent doesn't have to be a shadow in the traditional sense. Rocky's opponent in the first two Rocky films is boxing champion Apollo Creed. He's not really a bad person at all. I mean, he's overconfident to be sure and likes to make fun of his opponents. But one would be hard-pressed to call him a straight-up bad guy. He's actually the one who provides Rocky with the opportunity to fight in the epic final match. But some shadows are more or less plain evil. I mentioned the Emperor in Star Wars earlier. Why is he so bad? The movies don't really provide an answer, but who cares? He's so fun to watch. Maybe that's why he has this enduring legacy. Many shadows are actually quite charismatic, and that makes them even more dangerous. A shadow doesn't have to be a character, by the way. A shadow can live inside you. You often see this in movies where people are slowly going insane, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Jack Torrance in The Shining. A shadow represents all our darkest and most destructive thoughts, like envy, jealousy, resentment, hate, part of us that we might not reveal to others or even to ourselves, only for them to one day explode on the poor people around us. And then we come to the Shapeshifter. This is a really interesting one. It could be a literal shapeshifter, like the T-1000 in Terminator 2, or the creature in The Thing, for instance, or a werewolf, or a vampire. A lot of shapeshifters tends to be bad. Now, it's important to stress that the transformation or the shapeshifting doesn't have to be physical. It can be a change of loyalty or a treason of some kind. Or say when the killer is revealed in a murder mystery, if you have a close group of people and one of them turns out to be the killer, well, that's the shapeshifting. So what does a shapeshifter represent inside ourselves? This one is actually a bit harder to nail down. The shapeshifter is a very elusive archetype, and I guess it should be, given the name. Vogler talks about how we project onto other people, and how those projections doesn't always add up upon closer inspection. Say you have an inner idea of what an ideal partner would be like, and you project those expectations onto someone who might not necessarily have them, and suddenly you wake up one morning and realize your partner is not at all what you thought. Your reality has essentially shifted. If I would add my own interpretation of this archetype, are there parts of us that we don't really understand? Say that you've found yourself really acting out of character in a certain situation, like you started screaming at someone for seemingly no reason, and you trying to understand exactly where that came from. Who are you really at your very core? Are you lying to yourself? Or are you truly what you think you are? So next up we have an archetype that is sort of related, I guess, to a shapeshifter, which is the Trickster. At its very core, this is what we might call the comic relief in a movie. In a tense situation, this archetype will provide laughs. upsetting the status quo, so to speak. A lot of heroes, particularly action heroes, wear the Trickster mask from time to time to get into the head of the Shadow or a Threshold Guardian. A Trickster can be an ally. You see a lot of Trickster allies in, for example, Disney movies, like The Lion King or Aladdin. And we might see a mentor wearing the mask of a Trickster as they meet the hero for the first time. So, you're beginning to see how a character can wear different masks during a story? Speaking of wearing different masks, there are a lot of iconic shadow characters that are also tricksters, like the Joker in Batman, or Pennywise the Clown, or Freddy Krueger. Like, evil is bad enough, but evil that toys around with you before going in for the kill, that's even worse, right? Inside ourselves, a trickster represents our sense of humor, the ability to take ourselves not that seriously, and maybe see things from a new perspective. And next up we have the ally. It's basically what it sounds like, the ally of the hero. Like a friend, or a colleague, or a sidekick robot. Usually an ally is someone that completes the hero in one way or another. If the hero is stiff and grumpy, then we might have a trickster ally to lighten things up a bit. An ally can also be the audience voice in certain parts of the story. If the hero is brave and fearless, then it might be helpful to have someone who can sort of represent the fear in the audience. Sometimes the line between allies and multiple heroes blur quite a bit, and it's not always clear cut on if we're dealing with multiple heroes or a hero and his or her allies. An ally represents our abilities and talents, and maybe our hidden abilities. Like, for example, someone invites you to play a game of tennis and you realize you have no idea how to play, but during the match you sort of discover that you actually might have a hidden talent for this game. So that concludes the archetypes, and next time we will look at the hero's journey itself and exactly how these archetypes might appear during a story. If you want to, check out one of your favorite movies and see if you can identify any archetypes or maybe characters that wear different masks as the story goes on. So if you found this helpful, write me below what you thought and if you have made any sort of insights and discoveries. And I'll see you again next time.